They say abandoned houses hold secrets, but some secrets are better left undisturbed. In the outskirts of small forgotten towns, the remnants of lives long gone sometimes whisper of horrors no one expected. Decaying furniture, cracked porcelain dolls, and rusting toys are common, but every so often, explorers stumble across objects that defy explanation, symbols carved into walls in blood-red paint, locked chests filled with strange relics, and rooms where the air feels impossibly heavy, as if the house itself resents your presence. Tonight we delve into abandoned homes where the things discovered should never exist. Abandoned houses have a peculiar way of preserving the past. They are not merely empty structures, they are unintentional museums, each layer of dust and peeling paint a testament to the lives once lived within their walls. When explorers enter these forgotten spaces, they often encounter the echoes of ordinary domestic life, a rocking chair frozen mid-sway, a broken teacup lying in a splintered cabinet, or a child's toy lying as if someone had walked away in the middle of play. At first glance, these remnants may seem innocuous, even quaint, offering a quiet glimpse into history. But as one spends more time in these homes, a subtle unease begins to take hold, a creeping sense that some stories are incomplete, that something about the abandoned atmosphere preserves more than just furniture and photographs. In towns long deserted by prosperity or left behind by industry, these houses become archives of human experience. They capture the minutiae of daily life in a way that public records cannot. A ledger left on a kitchen counter may reveal the pattern of purchases and debts of a family struggling to maintain a household, while faded letters pinned to a corkboard whisper of long-lost loves, bitter arguments, and hidden sorrows. Even the physical architecture contributes to the sense of history. Narrow staircases groaning under weight they have not borne for decades, fireplaces blackened with soot from winters long past, and floors scarred by generations of footsteps that can no longer be traced to living memory. Every room becomes a snapshot, a frozen moment that in its stillness evokes a startling intimacy with lives now vanished. But these homes are not just static collections, they retain the emotional residue of the past. Visitors often describe a sensation of being watched, or an almost tangible presence in the air, as though the house remembers those who once walked its corridors. There is a psychological weight in spaces where human activity has been abruptly interrupted, where personal belongings remain where they were last used. It is in these moments that the ordinary becomes unsettling. A chair tipped over in a hallway may initially appear as if knocked by chance, but in the shadowed silence, it suggests a sudden departure, a hint of panic or fear. A diary left open, its ink faded but legible, can reveal more than the writer intended, exposing intimate thoughts and anxieties in stark contrast to the sterile way history is usually recorded. Abandoned houses can also serve as mirrors, reflecting both societal and cultural changes over time. The style of decoration, the types of appliances, even the clothing left behind, provide a historical context that educates as much as it unsettles. They allow researchers, historians, and urban explorers to understand the evolution of domestic life, social hierarchies, and community structures. In some cases, homes abandoned after economic collapse or personal tragedy reveal patterns of human behavior in times of distress. A half-finished meal on a dusty table, an unmade bed, or a door left ajar can offer subtle but profound insights into the disruptions that led to abandonment. Yet, the educational value of these spaces is inseparable from their darker potential. While most abandoned homes are silent witnesses to the past, some contain the remnants of violence, neglect, or obsession. It is often in these contexts that seemingly innocuous objects take on a sinister quality. A cracked porcelain doll with its eyes scratched out, a series of symbols carved into a wall, or a lockbox hidden beneath floorboards. The ordinary is transformed into the uncanny, because it has been abandoned under circumstances that suggest more than mere forgetfulness. These discoveries, when contextualized against historical records or local lore, illuminate not only individual lives but also the hidden, often uncomfortable truths about the communities and societies in which they existed. For those who enter with curiosity, abandoned houses are simultaneously a lesson in history and a confrontation with mortality. They teach the fragility of human endeavor and the persistence of memory. Every faded photograph, every warped piece of furniture, and every whisper of air moving through empty corridors reminds visitors that the past is never fully gone. It lingers, sometimes quietly, sometimes in ways that are impossible to ignore. In abandoned houses, explorers often encounter objects that suggest something far more sinister than mere neglect or decay. At first, these items may seem out of place simply because they no longer belong in a house left to rot, but with closer inspection, a pattern emerges, one that hints at human activity meant to disturb, manipulate, or even harm. Broken mirrors with faces scratched away, jars filled with powders whose composition is unrecognizable, and symbols crudely carved into wood and plaster are more than curiosities. They are artifacts of intention. They suggest rituals, obsessions, or crimes that were deliberately concealed, and their presence transforms an ordinary derelict house into a space haunted by unseen human motives. Those who stumble upon these objects are often unprepared for the psychological effect. The first encounter can feel like stepping into a narrative that was never meant to be witnessed. A porcelain doll, its features mutilated in a way that defies logic, sitting perfectly upright in a chair can provoke a visceral unease that is difficult to articulate. Explorers report that their first instinct is disbelief, then fascination, and finally a creeping fear that something beyond comprehension is being communicated through these objects. The house becomes a stage for a drama frozen in time, and every item is a prop in a story whose end is unknown, a story that leaves the visitor grappling with the darker sides of human psychology. Many of these items appear to be left behind deliberately, as if the original inhabitants wanted them to be found, or feared they would never be discovered and abandoned them anyway. Lockboxes brimming with strange relics, journals filled with coded entries, and even children's toys arranged in unsettling formations are evidence that the abandoned house was a vessel for hidden knowledge, secret practices, or forbidden obsessions. In some cases, these artifacts are connected to local folklore or unsolved crimes, giving them a chilling context. A room may contain ritualistic objects that mirror descriptions in historical records of missing persons or occult practices, and suddenly the house becomes a living record of acts that were both concealed and calculated, waiting silently for someone to uncover their meaning. The impact of encountering such objects is not purely intellectual, it is deeply visceral. Explorers describe an almost physical sensation of the house reacting to their presence. The air grows heavier, shadows seem to deepen, and an oppressive stillness fills the rooms, as though the walls themselves were aware of the trespass. Even mundane items like rusted kitchen utensils or faded clothing can take on a sinister quality when found alongside objects clearly used for darker purposes. The juxtaposition of ordinary domesticity with evidence of secretive, possibly violent human activity creates a dissonance that lingers long after the house is left behind. Historical accounts suggest that these objects are often clues to events that authorities were never able to fully investigate. In towns where disappearances or unexplained deaths occurred decades ago, abandoned houses sometimes harbor items that retrospectively illuminate the patterns of criminal behavior. Objects left behind in these spaces are not random. They can map the psychological state of the individuals who created or used them, revealing obsessions, fears, and even intentions. They act as a silent testimony to actions that were never recorded, a way for history to speak when official records fall silent. The discoveries also raise ethical questions. Should explorers report every object to authorities, or are some items too dangerous to touch or publicize? Some artifacts appear almost intentionally threatening, as though the original owners knew the consequences of discovery and sought to imprint fear into anyone who dared enter. Even well-intentioned curiosity can provoke a response from the house itself: strange noises, inexplicable movements, or a sensation of being watched, blurring the line between historical study and survival. In these abandoned spaces, the objects do more than document the past, they embody it. They reveal human nature at its most obsessive, its most secretive, and sometimes its most violent. Each discovery is an encounter with a fragment of history that challenges understanding, demanding attention not just to what the items are but to why they exist, and what they reveal about the minds that created them. The psychological effect of discovering objects in abandoned houses is often immediate, but its depth is far more insidious. When someone steps into a house that has long been left to decay, they enter a space where the ordinary is intertwined with traces of lives interrupted, sometimes violently. The human mind is attuned to detect anomalies, and when it encounters objects that are out of place, like a doll with its eyes gouged out, a chair meticulously positioned in the middle of a room, or a set of journals filled with cryptic drawings, the response is visceral. There is a mixture of curiosity and dread, fascination and a primal caution, as if the very atmosphere is warning the observer that some things were never meant to be witnessed. The effect is amplified by the silence. In these abandoned homes, sound carries differently, shadows behave unpredictably, and even a slight breeze can feel charged with intent. Explorers often report a sense of being watched, an intangible pressure that intensifies as they move deeper into the house. Rooms that are empty by all appearances seem to hold a memory of their inhabitants, not just their possessions. Every step on the creaking floorboards resonates like a heartbeat in a grave, and the mind begins to read intent into objects that in another context would be entirely mundane. A teacup sitting upside down on a dusty counter may, in the imagination of the explorer, represent more than abandonment. It becomes a signal, a frozen moment of panic or ritual. This blending of reality and perception demonstrates how profoundly the human psyche can be affected by the juxtaposition of ordinary objects and their ominous context. Even those with years of experience entering derelict buildings find themselves unsettled when confronted with artifacts that hint at deliberate and often disturbing human action. A small wooden box, locked and coated in grime, might contain powders or small figurines that speak to practices outside societal norms. Symbols carved into walls in ways that defy explanation can elicit an involuntary shiver, triggering an instinctive sense that these marks were meant to influence, protect, or harm. The explorer's reactions are rarely purely intellectual. They are bodily, emotional, almost chemical. Heart rates rise, palms sweat, and the mind races to reconcile the ordinary with the inexplicable. This psychological effect is heightened by the layering of history in abandoned spaces. Objects left behind are often decades old, yet they feel immediate, as though the house itself has preserved the intentions of its former inhabitants. When a diary is found on a splintered desk, open to a passage describing secrecy or fear, it is not merely words on paper, it is a window into a consciousness frozen in time. The impact on those who discover these items is amplified by the sense that they are intruding, not just on property, but on a living memory. Each object functions as a trigger, awakening emotions that have long since faded in the outside world. Even the most skeptical individuals are not immune. Explorers report hallucinations or imagined movements in their peripheral vision, a heightened sense of vulnerability, and difficulty distinguishing between what is real and what the mind supplies in response to stimuli. The psychological imprint of these discoveries lingers long after the house is left behind. Sleep becomes restless, dreams populated by fragments of the artifacts, and a lingering unease settles into daily life. Some describe an almost obsessive need to return, to understand, to make sense of the incomprehensible, as though the objects themselves demand attention. The effect of encountering these seemingly impossible or unsettling artifacts underscores the power of abandoned houses to influence human perception. They are not inert spaces. They are charged with the intentions, obsessions, and sometimes the violence of those who once occupied them. Objects, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, carry the weight of that history, and in the silence of the abandoned home, that weight is felt as acutely as any physical presence. It is in this interplay of object, memory, and human psyche that abandoned houses reveal their darkest lesson, that the past does not remain confined to its own time, and that the traces left behind can haunt those who dare to enter. Patterns of unexplained phenomena are surprisingly common across abandoned properties, revealing a thread that connects spaces separated by geography and time. Explorers who have spent years investigating derelict homes note that while each house carries its own unique story, there are recurring elements, strange sounds, objects that move seemingly on their own, sudden temperature shifts, and the inexplicable feeling of being observed. These patterns suggest that abandonment does more than freeze objects in time. It creates an environment where ordinary laws of cause and effect seem, at least perceptually, to bend. The first time someone steps into a home with such anomalies, they may dismiss it as imagination or fatigue, but as incidents repeat in different locations, a disturbing pattern emerges, hinting that these spaces retain a memory, a resonance of the lives and events that once filled them. One explorer might find a staircase that creaks under no apparent weight, while another encounters doors that slam without wind or human touch. In some cases, photographs left behind capture shadows that cannot be explained, shapes lurking at the edges of the frame where no one was standing. Windows streaked with years of neglect sometimes reflect figures that do not exist in the room. Even the air seems to carry an emotional residue, a tangible heaviness that settles in the chest and makes each step more deliberate. These anomalies often appear in houses with a history of turmoil, domestic conflict, sudden departures, disappearances, or local legends of violence, but they are not confined to homes with known dark histories. The repetition of these phenomena suggests a more complex interplay between memory, human energy, and physical space than can be explained by simple superstition or coincidence. Objects themselves are central to these patterns. Explorers consistently report items in positions that defy logic, appearing to have been moved when no one was present. Dolls with broken limbs, chairs tipped at impossible angles, and personal belongings rearranged in ways that seem deliberate provoke a creeping unease. These rearrangements are rarely violent in appearance. They are subtle, as though the house is nudging visitors toward a recognition of some hidden truth. Sometimes these shifts are accompanied by sensory phenomena, a soft whisper, a distant thud, or the fleeting scent of perfume long vanished. Each anomaly, small on its own, becomes part of a larger tapestry of unease, a set of interrelated cues that amplify the psychological tension of the space. Historical context often provides insight into these recurring patterns. Abandoned houses, particularly those left suddenly or after traumatic events, tend to preserve traces of emotional energy. Families who disappeared, fled, or suffered violence within these walls leave behind not just physical artifacts but an imprint of intent, fear, and memory. This imprint, while invisible to the eye, manifests in ways that explorers describe with remarkable consistency. The patterns of movement, the repeated appearance of certain objects, and the inexplicable sounds create a narrative that echoes the original occupants' experiences. In some instances, these patterns have even guided historians or investigators toward previously overlooked evidence, connecting objects and events that were otherwise dismissed as anecdotal. The repetition of phenomena across multiple locations also raises questions about the nature of perception itself. Witnesses often report that once they recognize a pattern in one house, their sensitivity to similar occurrences elsewhere increases. It is as though the mind, primed by prior experience, begins to perceive subtle cues that would otherwise be ignored. Yet even the most skeptical observers, those who enter these spaces armed with scientific reasoning and measurement tools, struggle to explain why certain phenomena recur. There is a tension between rational explanation and the undeniable experience of the explorers, a tension that reinforces the haunting quality of abandoned homes. These patterns underscore a central truth about derelict spaces. They are more than abandoned structures. They are living archives of human activity and emotion, capable of influencing those who enter them. Every creak, shadow, and rearranged object is part of an ongoing dialogue between past and present, a subtle but persistent reminder that the lives once contained within these walls continue to echo long after the doors have been boarded up. Historical cases reveal that the discovery of certain objects in abandoned houses can dramatically change our understanding of past crimes and tragedies. Often what seems like a random assortment of decayed belongings, a set of broken toys, a ledger of receipts, or a stack of yellowed letters, can hold clues to events that authorities never fully piece together. In some towns, decades-old mysteries were quietly forgotten, overshadowed by economic decline, shifting populations, or the natural tendency of communities to move on from tragedy. Yet when urban explorers or historians uncover these abandoned spaces, they sometimes stumble upon evidence that rewrites the narrative, revealing connections between people, places, and events that were previously invisible. Consider a house left vacant for nearly 50 years, where a dusty attic yielded stacks of documents detailing transactions and correspondences that hinted at illicit activities. Initially, they appeared mundane: names, dates, and numbers, but careful examination revealed a pattern, a network of trades and loans that connected the occupants to individuals who had vanished under mysterious circumstances. The objects in isolation might have seemed trivial. Together, however, they formed a map, pointing investigators toward a timeline of events that had been obscured by time and neglect. The house became more than a derelict structure. It became a witness, silently testifying to crimes that had otherwise escaped the record books. In other instances, ritualistic objects, odd trinkets, or symbolic markings discovered within abandoned homes provided insight into behaviors that had never been fully documented. Police reports might have referenced unexplained deaths or disappearances, but lacked concrete evidence to tie them to specific individuals. The objects left behind, however, served as a form of historical evidence, offering clues about the mental state, obsessions, or intentions of the former inhabitants. Even seemingly insignificant items, a notebook filled with strange sketches, a doll with its face intentionally damaged, or jars containing unknown substances, could be pieces of a puzzle that illuminated violent or secretive acts long forgotten. Through these discoveries, the abandoned house itself became a repository of truth, preserving fragments of history that had no other place to survive. The emotional weight of such discoveries cannot be underestimated. For the explorers or historians who encounter them, there is an immediate sense of responsibility to document, to preserve, to interpret. Yet the objects themselves often resist easy explanation, leaving the observer in a delicate balance between fascination and fear. A diary may recount everyday domestic life, then abruptly shift into accounts of aggression, obsession, or unexplained phenomena. A room may contain the remnants of a meal prepared long ago, alongside symbols scrawled on the walls that hint at ritual or violence. These juxtapositions force a reconsideration of how ordinary domestic spaces can harbor extraordinary darkness, and how seemingly trivial items can carry the weight of untold histories. Sometimes these discoveries challenge not only local understanding, but also broader historical narratives. Objects found in abandoned homes can contradict official accounts or suggest that crimes were overlooked, misclassified, or intentionally concealed. A chest filled with personal letters might reveal complicity in criminal activity, while artifacts of occult practices may indicate motivations for events previously dismissed as accidents or coincidences. Historians and investigators are often left to reconstruct narratives using these fragments, piecing together a story that bridges decades, communities, and the private lives of those long gone. The persistence of these objects, surviving decades of decay and abandonment, emphasizes the uncanny ability of material culture to bear witness. Unlike human memory, which fades or distorts, objects endure, retaining traces of their creation and use. In the quiet, shadowed halls of an abandoned house, they speak to the curious and the observant, offering a direct, if sometimes unsettling, link to history. The act of discovery transforms a derelict home into an archive of the unseen, the forgotten, and the intentionally hidden, allowing modern observers to glimpse facets of the past that would otherwise remain lost. The ethical questions raised by discoveries in abandoned houses are as complex as the objects themselves. When explorers stumble upon evidence of past crimes, ritualistic items, or objects that hint at deeply personal obsessions, they are confronted with a dilemma. Should these findings be shared with authorities, preserved for historical study, or left undisturbed out of caution? Each choice carries consequences, and the decision is rarely straightforward. In some cases, reporting an artifact could reignite local interest in an old crime, potentially disturbing families who have long tried to forget. In others, failing to report evidence could allow a pattern of violence or secrecy to remain hidden, denying closure or justice to those affected. The question becomes even more pressing when the objects themselves appear deliberately threatening. Explorers often describe the sensation of being watched, or experiencing subtle, inexplicable movements or sounds within the house. Some objects seem almost to resist being examined, as if their presence demands a level of respect, fear, or ritualized caution. A small, intricately carved box might contain powders or other materials that, while unidentifiable, carry a sense of danger. A journal filled with coded messages or symbols may hint at intentions that were never fully acted upon, yet the knowledge of their existence is enough to provoke anxiety. In these moments, the ethical consideration shifts from what should be shared to what should be preserved, and whether any intervention risks triggering consequences beyond human comprehension. Beyond personal safety, there is the question of historical integrity. Abandoned houses, particularly those untouched for decades, are fragile time capsules. Removing objects for study or display can disrupt the context in which they were left, erasing subtle cues that help interpret the past. A photograph on a crumbling dresser, a doll positioned in a hallway, or a series of scratches on the wall may all be part of a larger narrative that is lost the moment the objects are moved or removed. The ethics of preservation, therefore, are intertwined with responsibility. Explorers must weigh the value of knowledge against the potential damage caused by their intrusion. This tension transforms the act of discovery into a moral exercise as much as a physical or intellectual one. Another consideration is the broader impact on communities. Some abandoned houses are located in small towns where stories of disappearances, crimes, or tragedies have become part of local folklore. Revealing evidence from these homes can reopen wounds, attract unwanted attention, or even endanger those still living nearby. Yet leaving discoveries unreported risks allowing dangerous knowledge to remain unexamined, potentially hiding patterns that could inform public safety or historical understanding. It is a delicate balance between transparency and discretion, a line that is rarely clear and often context-dependent. The ethical challenges extend to the psychological effect on those who make the discoveries. Witnessing objects that hint at violence, obsession, or ritual can have a lasting impact, shaping perceptions of reality and instilling a sense of unease that lingers long after the house is left behind. Explorers often grapple with guilt, fear, and responsibility, knowing that their curiosity has brought them face to face with the darkest aspects of human behavior. The act of choosing how to respond, whether to report, conceal, or study, becomes a test of judgment, empathy, and moral courage. Even scientific and historical approaches are complicated by these ethical concerns. Archaeologists and historians must decide whether documenting objects in situ is sufficient, or whether intervention is necessary to protect fragile evidence. Law enforcement faces similar dilemmas. Items may provide critical insight into unsolved cases, yet improper handling could destroy vital forensic information. Each decision carries weight because the objects themselves are more than relics. They are witnesses to human actions, sometimes horrific, sometimes obsessive, that demand careful consideration before they are disturbed. In exploring abandoned homes, the ethical dimension is inseparable from the act of discovery itself. Every object, every mark, and every fragment of the past is part of a delicate ecosystem of memory, secrecy, and consequence, challenging those who enter to consider not only what they see but what their response might mean. One of the most unsettling aspects of abandoned homes is the lingering sense that these spaces remember the events that took place within them. Unlike the outside world, which continues its cycles and erases traces of the past over time, a derelict house preserves the imprint of human activity, emotion, and sometimes violence. Visitors often describe a sensation that the walls themselves are aware of their presence, as though the house has absorbed the intentions, fears, and obsessions of its former inhabitants. This is not merely poetic speculation. Multiple accounts from explorers, historians, and even former residents suggest that some homes retain an atmosphere that is difficult to explain, a resonance that communicates a story far more profoundly than written records ever could. The evidence of this memory often manifests in subtle but chilling ways. A hallway might carry the faint scent of smoke, even though the fireplace has long been cold. Footsteps echo in rooms where no one is walking, or doors creak open without cause. Objects appear to shift positions slightly, or personal belongings are discovered in arrangements that seem deliberate, as though guiding the observer to notice something hidden. These phenomena are rarely aggressive. They are quiet, persistent, and unnervingly intelligent in their subtlety. It is as if the house has a consciousness, or at the very least a memory that records and occasionally communicates the lives and actions of those who once dwelled inside. The objects themselves contribute to this sense of recollection. Broken toys, scattered papers, and even faded photographs often carry a power disproportionate to their size. They evoke the presence of people long gone, as if each item is a fragment of a personality trapped in time. In some abandoned homes, explorers have reported discovering evidence of unfinished rituals or obsessive behavior, such as symbols scrawled in hidden corners or personal belongings arranged in repeated patterns. The meticulousness of these arrangements implies intentionality, and yet the absence of the creators leaves the observer with a profound sense of unease. The house becomes a silent witness, holding not only physical artifacts but the psychological residue of actions that can no longer be explained. Local history often corroborates the sense of memory within these homes. In towns where disappearances, unsolved crimes, or sudden family tragedies occurred, abandoned houses are frequently the sites of recurring phenomena. Windows shattered without cause, doors that lock themselves, and whispers that echo in empty hallways suggest that the emotional imprint of trauma is encoded into the space itself. Some historians theorize that human emotion, particularly intense fear, obsession, or grief, can create lasting impressions on the environment, a kind of psychic residue that persists long after the original events. Whether explained scientifically or not, the consistency of these reports across decades and locations lends credibility to the idea that abandoned houses do more than hold objects, they hold memory. For those who enter these spaces, the awareness of the house's memory can be disorienting. Time seems to behave differently. An hour inside may feel like minutes, or conversely, a brief visit can leave a lasting psychological imprint. Explorers often recount dreams populated by fragments of the house, shadows in the corner of a room, or the lingering sensation of being observed. This influence extends beyond the physical space, seeping into perception and imagination, demonstrating the profound psychological impact of environments imbued with human history and unresolved events. The knowledge that a house can remember human activity raises questions about responsibility and reverence. Every visitor interacts with this memory, consciously or unconsciously, and the choices they make, whether to touch, move, or document objects, can alter the narrative preserved within the walls. In this way, the act of entering an abandoned home is both an exploration of history and a confrontation with the invisible traces left by those who came before. The house, in turn, responds in its own way, a subtle reminder that the past is never truly gone, and that some spaces are more alive with memory than anyone could anticipate. As the shadows of these abandoned houses settle back into silence, one can't help but wonder how many stories lie waiting untouched behind locked doors and boarded windows. The objects we've seen, the symbols carved into walls, the traces of lives abruptly ended or hidden away, they are fragments of a past that refuses to fade. What would you do if you stumbled upon a room that felt alive with memory, a space where the air itself seemed heavy with the weight of secrets never meant to be revealed? If this story left a chill lingering in your mind, if you feel the echo of footsteps in empty hallways or the whisper of voices in the dark, then stay with us. Subscribe to the channel and join a growing circle of those drawn to the forgotten, the hidden, and the inexplicable. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever encountered a place that seemed to remember more than it should, or a discovery that made you question the line between history and the unknown? Every abandoned home, every relic, every shadow holds a story waiting to be uncovered. Don't let the next secret go untold. Hit subscribe and prepare to step into the darkness again.